We are following President Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's remarks at the White House. His arrival to Washington comes as lawmakers are working to negotiate a last-minute potential aid package and before a vote in the House to approve an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. Political reporter for Semafor, Kadia Goba, joins us now. Good to see you, Kadia. Congressional reaction, what has congressional reaction been like to President Biden and President Zelensky's press conference this evening?
Yeah, so members are still adamant, and it doesn't seem to have moved anything or anyone's mind. Members who were on the fence about whether or not they would support Ukraine seem to still be there. I mean, Speaker Johnson, immediately after meeting with Zelensky, said that, while they stand with Ukraine, he still wants those border provisions that they've been asking for, and they want the White House to give them some kind of endgame analysis as to when, the U.S. will pull out. So it doesn't seem to have moved many people that I've talked to on the Hill.
Even though it may not have moved the needle, what are you hearing from your sources about some of those discussions that happened behind closed doors with the Speaker, Leader Jeffries, and senators today?
I think they want people to come to a consensus. I know that leadership is probably has some trepidation about bringing another vote to the floor without it passing. I do know there is a strong sense to separate Israel and Ukraine funding. There's a new House Freedom Caucus chair, and he has this same stance that, he sees passing. I asked him what his vision is for the caucus, and he said, passing Israel funding with the IRS measure sometime down the line in 2024. Ukraine, he still doesn't feel like this should be part of it. So I just don't see any mind changing behind the scenes either.
That being said, is there any possibility of a deal being made before the holiday? And if not, what are the implications?
Yeah, I don't see much of an appetite for anything before the holiday, but I don't see this getting any better for Congress at large when in the new year. And let me be clear, this is a minority. There is still an appetite I think there is still enough votes to actually pass this on the floor. But it does make me a little worrisome that they're not bringing it to the floor. They obviously have the support of Democrats, and I think more Republicans want to see at least this last package. But it brings me some trepidation, like I said, because I don't see them bringing to the floor. And I think there's going to be less steam or less support if they move this on to 2024.
I know the president said that his administration is working with both Senate Democrats and Republicans to try to reach a compromise with respect to Ukraine aid and border security. What could a potential compromise look like?
So it's interesting because I think they should be talking to the people, some of those vulnerable Republicans or Republicans in Biden districts that, want some kind of border measure to pass. Right now, there is this split in the Republican conference where hard right Republicans want H.R. 2 as it is. And then there are other people, more moderate Republicans and people in those border districts that just want to see some kind of provision passed. Where they land on this is going to be interesting, and I think that's going to be dictated largely by the Senate. I think it's going to be up to the Senate to pass something robust enough to bring back to the House to just get it through. But yeah, I do not see H.R. 2 in its entirety or as it is going into any funding bill at this point. But I do think there will be some kind of border, if at all any.
Yeah, but if H.R. 2 isn't in there, which we know goes too far for Democrats, is that a deal breaker then for House Republicans?
No, I do think that they'll have to peel off and bring some kind of compromise. I think there is enough support from, like I said, those moderate members or members who just want to get some kind of border provision done. I think there is some support if they have if they have Democrats on their side. It's just a matter of what that looks like. And it doesn't, things are moving very, very slowly in the Senate on the evolution of any kind of border compromise. But I do think there's an appetite to do some kind of border provision. What that is, I can't speak to at this point.
Yeah, well, turning to other matters that Congress is taking up, as you know, the House is moving forward with a vote to launch an impeachment inquiry Wednesday to formalize that. Let's take a listen to what Speaker Johnson told reporters today.
The impeachment inquiry is necessary because, as you know, our committees of jurisdiction, oversight, judiciary, ways and means, Chairman Comer and Jordan and Smith have done an extraordinary job following the facts on this. Remember, it's Article 1 of the Constitution gives the House the impeachment authority. And I've said at this podium before, next to a declaration of war, impeachment, arguably the heaviest power that the House has.
I know the Speaker said this is a necessary step in his view, but why are Republicans moving forward with this now?
Well, I think there were a lot of criticism at this onset that there wasn't an impeachment inquiry vote. I think if you remember when Kevin McCarthy brought this up and said that the impeachment inquiry at the beginning or middle of the year, he talked about the 3 committees that would be spearheading it. There was a lot of pushback from people who said, well, there should be an inquiry vote. Well, now there's that vote. And we actually see some of the more moderate Republicans, especially those coming out of New York and those Biden plus districts, who initially said, well, there wasn't enough evidence, but now, well, you know, an inquiry is a little different. This will be interesting. I think they have the votes to pass it. There's one, Mr. Buck from Colorado, who has been adamant about, you know, he just doesn't see this as a way to move forward. But I don't see how Republicans get out of not actually impeaching Joe Biden after they go through an impeachment inquiry. I think, like, do you just let him off the hook at this point after that? I think that is something that they'll have to come to terms with after they pass this impeachment resolution or impeachment inquiry resolution.
Also, in terms of House Republicans, they got a lot of attention for that hearing last week on anti-Semitism on college campuses. We saw the resignation of the president of the University of Pennsylvania. Harvard announced today that its president, Claudine Gay, will stay on. Want to just play a bit of sound from Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who led that line of questioning.
This is a moral failure of Harvard's leadership and higher education leadership at the highest levels. And the only change they have made to their code of conduct, where they failed to condemn calls for genocide of the Jewish people, the only update to the code of conduct is to allow a plagiarist as the president of Harvard.
So just very briefly, I know the Congresswoman was calling for the presidents of Harvard and MIT to resign, but where does this congressional investigation go from here?
So I think they aren't going, I think Stefanik's team isn't going to let up on this. I think this is something that they're going to dig in on. And I probably will see, I'm hearing word from sources that there will be something brought to the floor, maybe a resolution around the letter that Stefanik and Moskowitz actually introduced on the floor.
All right, Kadia Goba, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.